For decades, Americans were told that index funds were the safest way to build wealth. Low fees, diversification, long-term growth. And for millions of people, that advice worked. But what happens when everyone follows the exact same strategy? What happens when everyone buys the same assets and one day wants to sell? The answer could change how you think about investing forever. It's early spring 2020. A 52-year-old public school teacher in Cleveland, Ohio, finishes grading papers late at night. For over 2 decades, you've followed every financial rule you were ever given. Quietly, consistently, without shortcuts. Each paycheck, you've set aside about 7% into your retirement account. Your employer adds a small match on top. You've never withdrawn from it, not once. You never tried to outsmart the market. You avoided stock picking. You ignored the noise and followed the standard advice. You invested in a broad market fund, the one everyone called dependable, the one financial books insisted would carry you safely into retirement, the one Charles Schwab popularized for everyday Americans, simple investing, accessible to all. And for 25 years, it worked exactly as expected. You watched your savings grow steadily, from $15,000 to nearly $380,000. Then, in less than 2 weeks, about $88,000 vanished. You don't panic. You don't sell. You've been told not to, so you stay invested. Months pass. The market rebounds. By the end of the year, your balance surpasses its previous high. You feel relief. Still, something lingers in the back of your mind, a quiet doubt you can't fully explain. If everyone is buying the same assets at the same time, for the same reason, what happens when everyone tries to exit at once? This isn't speculation, it's basic math, and the conclusion is something the financial system rarely explains openly. Here's what you've always heard about index-style investing. It's low cost, it spreads risk. Over time, it outperforms most professionals, and for the average person, it's the most rational choice. All of that is broadly accurate, but there's another side to the story. These funds were originally designed to complement a market led by active decision-makers. They were never intended to dominate it entirely. Yet today, that's exactly what has happened. By 2024, passive strategies control roughly 52% of U.S. equity fund assets. The largest asset managers, Fidelity Investments, Charles Schwab Corporation, and T. Rowe Price, collectively oversee more than $20 trillion. That figure rivals the scale of the entire U.S. economy. Together, they are major shareholders in close to 85% of companies within the S&P 500. Not through coordination, but through millions of individuals following identical advice. A system built to distribute opportunity has gradually concentrated influence at an unprecedented level. This isn't an accusation, it's what the data reflects. The trend has been forming for decades. In the mid-1970s, Peter Lynch helped popularize the idea that simple, long-term investing could outperform complex strategies. The concept was straightforward. Most professionals failed to beat the market over extended periods. After accounting for fees, actively managed funds often trail basic market benchmarks. And the evidence supported that claim. Across 10, 15, and 20-year spans, roughly 68% to 88% of active funds underperformed. Investors were paying high fees, often near 1.8%, for weaker results than low-cost alternatives. The solution seemed obvious. Instead of trying to outperform the market, just own it. Hold a broad basket of stocks, weighted by size, and stay invested. No predictions, no frequent trading, no complexity. Over time, this approach proved difficult to beat. By the late 2000s, this philosophy had become mainstream. It was seen as the ultimate strategy for long-term investors. And in many ways, it worked. But systems evolve. And when they scale, they produce new effects. To understand what's happening now, you need to recognize a simple principle. These funds allocate money based on company size. The larger the company, the more capital it receives. Microsoft is valued in the trillions. A A smaller manufacturing firm might be worth only a few billion. Naturally, the larger company receives far more investment. At first glance, this seems logical. You're reflecting the structure of the market itself. But there's an important feedback loop. When new money enters these funds, it automatically flows into the largest companies. Their prices rise, their valuations increase, which means future investments allocate even more capital to them. When money leaves, the reverse occurs. The largest holdings face the greatest selling pressure. This amplifies both upward and downward movements. When passive investing represented just 6 to 11% of the market, this effect was minimal. Active investors still drove pricing through analysis and decision-making. But today, the balance has shifted. At current levels, this feedback loop is no longer minor. It influences the system itself. From 2011 to 2021, passive funds attracted roughly $280 billion annually. Day after day, capital flowed into the largest companies, and those companies continued to expand in dominance. During that period, the top 5 firms in the S&P 500 grew from about 11% of the index to nearly 23%. Was this purely driven by fundamentals, or was it reinforced by the structure of investment flows? The reality is uncertain. We've never seen this dynamic at such scale before. Ownership concentration is one issue, but not the deepest one. When you buy shares, you're not just buying returns, you're also gaining influence. Shares carry voting rights over leadership, compensation, and major decisions. So, who exercises those rights in large funds? Not individual investors. When you invest through firms like Fidelity Investments or Charles Schwab Corporation, voting authority remains with the fund managers. Small internal committees make decisions affecting corporate governance across major companies. As of recent estimates, these large institutions influence about 23% of shareholder votes in major U.S. firms. They rarely oppose management directly. They usually align with existing leadership, not due to lack of power, but because their influence is already built into the system. Executives understand who their largest shareholders are. They anticipate expectations. They adjust decisions accordingly. This isn't illegal. It's a predictable outcome of concentrated ownership. But there's another layer. These institutions don't just invest in one company per industry. They invest across entire sectors: airlines, banks, healthcare, technology. When the same investors hold major stakes in competing companies, incentives begin to align. History offers a similar pattern. In the early industrial era, figures like Andrew Carnegie, Henry Clay Frick, and Cornelius Vanderbilt consolidated control across industries. Competition weakened. Markets became more coordinated. This led to regulatory responses like the Sherman Antitrust Act and Clayton Act. Those laws targeted visible coordination. But modern ownership is more subtle. No direct agreements, no closed-door meetings, just overlapping stakes. Research suggests this still affects outcomes. A 2019 study found that routes with higher shared ownership saw airline ticket prices rise by roughly 4 to 6%. In banking, similar patterns emerged. Deposit rates slightly decreased, while lending rates edged higher. This isn't explicit collusion, it's aligned incentives. If a major investor holds stakes across competing firms, the goal isn't domination by one, it's stable profitability across all. Executives don't need instructions. They understand the landscape, and they act accordingly. At the same time, the benefits remain clear. Everyday investors now have access to diversified portfolios at extremely low cost. Even a factory worker can own a slice of hundreds of companies while paying only a fraction of a percent annually. The asset managers benefited on a massive scale. Fidelity Investments alone oversees close to $9 trillion. Even minimal fees, when applied to that amount, generate enormous income. Large corporations gained as well. Every retirement contribution, every automatic deposit, channels money into the biggest companies. This steady flow acts like a support level under their stock prices. Corporate executives also saw advantages. When your primary shareholders are passive funds that rarely challenge management, your position becomes more secure. A 2021 study showed that CEO compensation at firms with high passive ownership rose noticeably compared to those dominated by active investors. The downsides, however, are spread more subtly. First, price discovery weakens. As active investing declines, fewer analysts focus on smaller firms. Fewer professionals examine financial reports in detail. As a result, the market becomes less effective at assigning value. Second, smaller companies face disadvantages. Because index funds allocate capital based on size, the largest firms receive consistent investment. Smaller businesses attract far less passive capital. Their cost of funding increases. Over time, the competitive balance shifts in favor of established giants. Third, the impact extends to workers and consumers. If shared ownership reduces competition, if airlines increase fares or banks lower savings rates, ordinary people bear the cost, not as investors but as customers. Fourth, future investors face a structural limitation. Passive investors, by definition, cannot collectively outperform the market. They are the market. The system only functions properly when someone else sets prices. That role belongs to active investors, those who analyze, research, and make decisions. But if everyone follows passive strategies, who determines value? We don't have long-term historical evidence for this scenario. We only have logic. And that logic raises concerns. This is where the structural limitation becomes clear. Index funds cannot be easily adjusted without undermining their core advantage. The entire idea of passive investing is simplicity. No decisions, broad ownership, long-term holding, no analysis, no selection. This works when passive investors remain a minority. They benefit from the work done by active participants. But as passive investing grows dominant, that dynamic begins to break down. Fewer participants are left doing the analytical work. Prices may drift further from underlying fundamentals. Here's the dilemma. If you try to fix this by making passive funds more active, encouraging them to vote more aggressively or select investments, you increase costs and lose efficiency. If you do nothing, concentration continues to grow and price discovery continues to weaken. From here, there are only a few possible paths forward. First, passive investing keeps expanding until the system becomes unstable. At some point, a shock exposes the fact that everyone holds similar positions and tries to exit simultaneously. Second, active investing becomes so rare that mispricing grows large enough to attract capital back. The system corrects itself, but only after significant distortion. Third, regulators step in. Authorities enforce structural changes, potentially limiting concentration. The era of effortless diversification comes to an end. None of these outcomes are painless, and none were part of the original promise. That's the underlying constraint. There's another mechanism worth understanding. Index funds provide daily liquidity. You can sell at any time during market hours. This creates the impression that they are as liquid as cash. They are not. When you sell shares of an ETF, either another investor buys them, or a market participant redeems them for the underlying assets and sells those assets. Under normal conditions, this process works smoothly. But if large numbers of investors sell at once, those underlying assets must be sold as well. If demand is insufficient, prices fall. That decline can trigger further selling. The system begins to strain. In March 2020, some bond ETFs traded at discounts of around 6 to 9% below the value of their holdings. The pricing mechanism temporarily broke down. Equity ETFs remained more stable, but largely because the Federal Reserve intervened quickly. We never fully observed what would happen if selling had continued unchecked. What happens when millions of investors act in the same direction? When inflows dominate on the way up and outflows dominate on the way down? History offers a warning. During the Black Monday on October 19, 1987, the Dow Jones fell approximately 21.8% in a single day. The trigger was a strategy known as portfolio insurance, an automated system designed to limit losses. When prices declined, the system initiated selling, but many investors were using the same strategy. As markets fell, they all sold at once. The result was a feedback loop of accelerating declines. The protection investors relied on vanished when everyone attempted to use it simultaneously. The parallel is difficult to ignore. Index investing depends on diversity of behavior. It works as long as not everyone follows the same approach. When that assumption breaks, the system weakens. Every system operates within certain limits, conditions that allow it to function. Index investing relies on active participants for price discovery. Yet active management continues to shrink. It depends on steady, balanced flows. But demographic shifts, like retiring populations, may reverse those flows. It assumes deep liquidity and stable arbitrage mechanisms. Yet market structure is becoming more fragile. Each of these conditions is under pressure. Because the system was built for a different environment. The real question isn't whether index funds are good or bad. It's what happens at the edges. What happens when the conditions that made them effective no longer apply? Even John Bogle warned in 2018 that passive investing should not grow too dominant. He suggested that ownership exceeding roughly 52% could introduce risks to the broader economy. He saw the pattern forming. He understood the limitation. But by then, the system had gained momentum, and systems rarely reverse course simply because risks appear. They change when stress exposes their weaknesses. This is an educational perspective, not financial advice. Past performance does not guarantee future outcomes. You began this video believing index funds were a simple, effective solution. You're finishing it with a more nuanced understanding. They were designed to play a supporting role in markets driven by active decisions. Now they have become the dominant force. The institutions managing them hold unprecedented levels of influence. The process of price discovery is evolving. Competitive dynamics may be shifting. Liquidity assumptions may not hold under pressure. None of this guarantees an immediate crisis, but it does mean one thing. You should understand what you own, what it represents, and how the system around it is changing. History is filled with systems that functioned until they didn't, until conditions shifted, until too many participants moved in the same direction at once. The question isn't whether this system will face a test, it's when. On this channel, Wolf Accumulate, we explore the hidden structures people trust without question, because the systems that fail are rarely the ones we watch closely. They're the ones we assume will always hold. Now you've seen the pattern. What you do next is your decision. I'd really appreciate it if you dropped your thoughts in the comments. I read the comments and I'll do my best to reply. If you found this helpful, hit the like button and subscribe to the Wolf Accumulate channel. Thanks for watching. Have a great evening and take care.